Welcome to the 2 Cent Dad podcast, where we interview dads to discuss their journeys of intentional fatherhood while doing work they care about and living a life of purpose. I'm your host, Mike Sudik.
The struggling moment is the seed for all innovation. Like the moment that we take away struggling moments from our kids, we're actually hindering them from learning how to innovate and be better.
Today's guest is a father of 4, married to the same woman for 26 years, creator of 3,000 products, and world thought leader in the Jobs to be Done methodology. Bob Moesta from the Rewired Group joins the show today to talk about how Jobs to be Done, which is a framework for thinking about product creation, flows into fatherhood. Well, today on the podcast, I have a very special guest, Bob Moesta from the Rewired Group. So Bob is a father of 4, husband of 26 years. He's created over 3,000 products. He's one of the leading thought leaders in Jobs to be Done method and theory. And why I wanted to have Bob on is because, Bob, you epitomize having made it, right? You're a father of 4. You've successfully been married for 26 years, all while growing a company. You obviously have never screwed up and succeeded, right? So that's why I wanted to have you on the show.
Many times. I have lots of bruises and bumps to be able to share along the way, and part of it is I feel like you with your 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and 8-month-old. I think back at those times and like, wow, did I even really pay enough attention? Do I have enough memories in my head to remember that stuff? And so there are things that I would love to be able to pass on, and at the same time I would say no, I haven't made it. There's no ideal thing. It's the trade-offs that you have to make along the way. I think as a parent, you always have to. There's just never enough time to do it all. So you have to be able to figure out what your priorities are and how to make the trade-offs and live with the decisions that you make.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I know that part of the reason I reached out to you is getting into the research of Jobs to be Done, and reading a book called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen, which I know you do a lot of work with him. Yep. But I wonder if you could just kind of maybe do an introduction to yourself in terms of like your journey to where you got to today. So
yeah. So first of all, I was born premature, and I have had 3 close head brain injuries. So it starts with the fact that I'm dyslexic, and that my mom, as a family, my mom basically was a teacher, and she knew that if I was labeled as dyslexic or special needs, I would be dependent on the system. And so she actually, as a parent, she taught me, in her words, it was to collaborate, but in the old days it would be cheating. But she taught me how all these workarounds to figure out how to cope with and not stick out and get my B's and C's so I could pass, so I could pass my classes. And so, but from that, what I've learned is how to ask really good questions and to be very curious on why, and not being able to see words and being able to have conversation around things. And so doing that, I've been able to, I started taking things apart when I was 4 or 5. I started having to put them back together so I didn't get in trouble by 7 or 8. And I've been putting things together since then, and I've pretty much developed and launched over 3,500 products. But the reality is I've built a whole bunch of different methods and tools to help me do that, and it's the gift of my dyslexia that has gotten me to this point. And so I think that's kind of the message, is that never know where life's going to take you, but the fact is you continually want to make progress. And this notion of Jobs to be Done is really about trying to help people understand the progress they're trying to make by pulling a product into their life. So they don't buy a product, they say they hire it, and they hire it to get to an outcome. And so they're in a situation, and that outcome helps us then figure out kind of how to design better products and services. And so it's that two-sided coin of what's the opportunity, but also what's the problem or the context they're in. And by doing that, you usually, for me, I've been able to develop, I've gotten much better at developing products by using that lens around things.
So would you say that your early exposure to that was with your dyslexia, and then your mom was saying, hey, we have this problem in this context, and we have to figure out a way to help Bob make this progress?
So for example, I think the one important thing that she taught me, it was how do I learn? So for example, I'm a kinesthetic learner. So if you make me sit still and I have to remember something, I actually can't remember a dang thing. And so, but if I take notes, I actually can't read the notes, but the imagery of doing that actually reminds me of exactly what I was doing. And so I have full recall as long as I'm moving. So in my office, I have whiteboards everywhere. I have places where I stand. I have standing desks. I have everything to be able to constantly be moving because that's how my mind works. The other thing is that also a visual learner, and so what's really broken in my brain is this connection of words. So I can see words that are 7 letters or longer, but I can't. Like once I get it, I'm still not sure what the word is, and so I have to use the context around the word. And then at the same time, I don't have the greatest lookup mechanisms, and so it literally is my eyes and my brain go ahead of my ability to look up, and so everything gets jumbled. So the way my mom taught me to read was circle the 7 largest words on a page and guess. I've been doing it since I've been 6 years old. And to be honest, I've turned into a hell of a guesser. I can literally read a book and get 80-90% of the comprehension by just looking at the big words.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. It's crazy. People are like, well, that means you can read. I'm like, okay, I can read, but it's just not in the traditional linear way that people have been taught to read because I have this problem where what I actually do is I see spaces. I don't see the word. So I start at both sides of the word and go this way or go together. And so that's why I can't see small words because they all jumble together to me.
So you've already kind of alluded to it, but that weakness has really led to a unique way of thinking for you that it seems like has really given you a unique advantage, especially in your consultancy and figuring out new ways to create products and then position products and all that. So that's really fascinating.
But I think this relates back to your children, right? At the same time, you have to realize that as much as they came from the union of you and your wife, all 4 of my children are so uniquely different because of, for example, the birth order. The first kid is very different than the fourth kid, and we didn't really know much about the first kid, and so we pampered the crap out of him. And by the fourth one, little Susie, she's 3 stairs up, and she falls down the stairs, and we look at her and say, "Get up." Where if it was Marty, we would have run over and said, "Are you okay? Are you?" And so there's just all these different contexts we wrap around it, and so knowing that around your kids and that. The struggling moment is the seed for all innovation. Like the moment that we take away struggling moments from our kids, we're actually hindering them from learning how to innovate and be better. And so to me, it's our job is not to protect our children. Our job is to prepare them for the world. Now, it doesn't mean you want to put them in harm's way, but at the same time, helping them too much or not having them step up and understanding consequences is an important thing to me that my wife and I have spent a lot of time of using, I'll say, jobs principles to help us raise our children.
Wow. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Why do you think that people want to protect them so much? I mean, there's a tendency like, helicopter parenting these days, or, people talk about that. Is that genuinely, do you think people know that they want to give their kids that experience and it's just a fear of not wanting them to be hurt?
Yeah, so in the jobs framework, we talk about there's social, emotional, and functional things that are going on when you decide to actually take action to do something. And my belief is there's a level of fear of I'm not going to be a good parent. There's a level of social fear where I don't want people to think I'm a bad parent. And the reality is to be honest, there's no handbook and we really don't know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the moment that you're there is like, if I can just control everything, then that makes me a good parent. And if you reflect on the people you knew as kids in high school, those parents who were the most controlling and controlled those kids were the wildest in college and typically weren't able to actually have the skills to cope, to move ahead. And so part of it is it's that called a paradox where you see one thing, but it's actually more control actually gives them less control. So it's very interesting.
So what is that? No, I think that's really interesting because it's almost like a generational thing that when you have the control, then you have the rebellious child, and then maybe the rebellious child either doesn't want to repeat the control, so goes completely the opposite way, or says, I need a control because I know how wild I was, and maybe but either way, it's this generational repetition, or patterns that kind of emerge.
Exactly.
So how do you break those patterns? I mean, how do you?
So the first thing you do is you have to acknowledge the patterns. You have to be able to see what they are and how they work and what's going on with it, and again be able to separate from which is a almost like a natural law, like physics, like PV equals nRT. Well, I can't break that pattern because I'm not smart enough to know how to do that. But at the same time, there's certain patterns where it's like, my parents were very strict, and typically you'll find that the stricter they were, and again, growing up, I would say they were very, that's not fair kind of thing. And the reality is, like, I think about it and say, like, my mom and dad weren't there to be my friend. My mom and dad were there to help me, guide me to to reach my potential and to work hard and give me work ethic and do a whole bunch of things like that. And so to me, it's really about making sure that we've, understand our role and perspective in it, and then seeing how, like, what's the real outcome you're seeking as a parent, and what are you seeking for your child. So it's actually two things. You're not just trying to be the best for your kid. You want to be also the best for you. Because if it's horrible for you and it's great for your kid, it's still horrible. And if it's great for you and horrible for your kid, it's still horrible. You got to figure out how to make sure it's the right for both of you.
Yeah, no, you said you're not there to be your child's friend, which that might be
No.
good for you, right? Like you gain a friend, but it's not the best for the child.
But it's not like, so my wife and I have had long conversations about this, but we feel there's three things we have to kind of impart to our children as as we're blessed with their presence, till they move out, which is, one is, I got to teach them how to make good decisions. And to do that, I can't make all the decisions for them. They have to make decisions, and then they have to be able to make bad decisions, because they got to know how to do that, because you're not going to be around the whole time. And the other thing is to figure out what they love to do. Like, if anything, for me, it was really this passion of realizing what I'm good at and what I'm bad at. And what was interesting is my life turned around, or turned for the better, when I was about 35, when for the longest time my mom basically said I should never tell anybody I was dyslexic. I shouldn't reveal it, and you should constantly work on it. So at 35, like 32 to 35, I was always working on spelling, and I could never spell. And I would think of was UV. If you listen to the word of, it's UV. And so trying to go to the dictionary and find of in the U's is impossible. Right? And so part of this is being able to realize, like, what I'm really not good at and letting go of it, but figuring out what I'm really good at and go find somebody who's good at the stuff that I'm bad at. And so I've found business partners, and everybody who's now around me, is we complement each other, because I have special powers in seeing patterns and being able to pull causality out and being able to see how things work. But, I suck at accounting, but I have people who love how to add things up. And when things balance, oh my God, they get joy out of it. I'm like, you just go do that, because I don't want any part of that.
So it's self-awareness is what you're talking
It's self-awareness. And I think part of it is teaching our kids the self-awareness. Like, so when they're not good at something, it's like they have a choice. Do you step up and try to get better at it? Do you have to, like, I think one of the things that my wife and I, again, were very explicit about is, like, practice. Kids who played like, if you signed up for a sport, you had to play the whole season. There's no way you were going to quit. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, what we would say is the moment that the kids understood and appreciated practice and loved practice as much, if not more, than the game, everything got better. And that life is really about, you're never always in the game, you're almost always practicing. And so can we actually get our kids to understand the value of practice, and the value of getting better at things, and the value of focusing on two or three things, and then winning will come by being self-aware. And so that's really where I think kind of how a lot of this translates back to how we've raised our kids.
So what was another guardrail that you guys used? Was it a general don't quit mentality? The sports was an easy, concrete thing to say, yes, you're going to follow through with a commitment. You're going to work hard. Were there other things around that? Because that could be taken to the extreme, the other way too, right?
That's right. Because if in a lot of cases, I think the desire of a kid is always to look good and be good at something. And what you find is that if they're not good at it immediately, let's say all four of our children played ice hockey. And, if they're not good at it right away, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's like, no, go out and skate, see where it is, basically by forcing them to think through that and get better at it. To be honest, they could start to see progress. And the moment that they saw, like, boy, this week I was better than last week, or, now I can skate backwards where I couldn't skate backwards. And all of a sudden they could see progress in different ways. Then all of a sudden they learn to like it. But if they watch the hockey game on TV and think they're going to go out and skate like a hockey player, it's kind of like, well, no, I don't want to do that sport. And they end up doing nothing. And so, to be honest, it was sitting it through. And then at the end, they'd have. So if you've listened to any of the Jobs to be done interviews, the interview technique is really based on criminal and intelligence interrogation. So it would be like, why don't you want to play hockey anymore? Or why, and they couldn't just say, well, I don't like it. It's like, is it too hard? Is it the fact that it's too often? Do you want to have other interests? You have like you just can't quit because you say, yeah, I just don't like it. Like almost the word like is one of the worst words in my in the family presence where they say they like something. You gotta say, why do you like it? What about it do you like? What don't you like about it? And it's unpacking all those terms. And so I think to me it's really making sure that they're explicit about kind of what actions they're taking and why they're doing it. And so whether you're hiring something and hiring a new sport or hiring a laptop, or my oldest son had to buy a mattress the other day, and it was pretty funny because it's like, well, Dad, can you just help me buy the mattress? I'm like, nope. You can use. He's in college. I'm like, I'll give you the credit card, but you got to figure out how to buy it. He goes, well, I don't know how to pick it up. I don't know where to get it from. I don't like. You got to go figure that out. Like if I did it for him, he'd not like at some point he's got to figure out how to do. He's 22, and so he's got his job and he's getting ready to graduate, and it's one of those things like you got to figure this stuff out. Like I'm not doing it. So,
but it's really easier just to take care of it, Bob. Just like you don't want to have him asking these questions. Just do it, right?
Yeah, and that's I have to tell you that's the thing is that and this is where you'd say, boy, I had it, I've made it. I would say there's times where as a parent, you just don't have enough energy, right? You just run out of energy, and it's like, oh my God, let me just get this so he can be done with it. But what you start to realize is that every time you do that, and the more you do it, you actually are hurting them. They're not becoming independent. They're not going to know how to, like. How do you get kids to understand you got to change the oil in a car when, like, at least when I was a kid, I had to go under the car and change the oil, and you'd figure out where you had to put it. Like they don't understand any of that stuff. And even when it comes up, it's like, Dad, what do I do? I'm like, oh my gosh. All right, I would just basically now I say, go get rid of the light or get rid of the thing. And they say, well, how do I do that? Go online and talk to Google. Mm-hmm. Because if I tell them, they don't, it doesn't register.
Yeah. That's that resourcefulness, right? Teaching them resourcefulness
that's right, and curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, that's right. Those are important. Those are important traits. And when they're young, it's a little harder, but at the same time, you'll be surprised at how fast your kids will mature and how smart they get when you give them that latitude and freedom to fail. Like especially when there's very little consequences to it, teaching them about failure and how to step up and how to pick themselves back up and try again. And I think those are all important things.
Yeah. As starting as early as riding a bike, it's an easy example, but yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And to be honest, I'm one of those people who would take things apart. So a lot of times we'll get a new bike and it'll be like, all right, hey Henry, let's go take the bike apart. And he's like, what? I'm like, let's just what are these things? How do these wheels go on here? Like, and you just start playing like. They just become curious of how things work and like, well, how does the wheel stay on? And you start asking questions to them and, oh, it's because these two bolts go together. Well, how does that happen? Well, they create, you can start to talk about language and teaching them concepts and all that stuff around a bike.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually was like changing the brakes on my car, and I had my 6-year-old son, and I was like, come on out here, you're gonna help me. Like he's like, I don't know, and then he's like ratcheting it, and he's like getting dirty, he just totally loved it. And I think the balance is how much do you force them to do that? Because if they just say I don't really want to, or I'm gonna do this other thing, it's still exposing them to other things. And like you were saying, you get to teach them other concepts, other words, and
yeah, I think that they have so much free time and there's so much other sensory stuff. I think like the one thing to me that's really missing in schools these days is they've gotten rid of like metal shop and wood shop and art and a lot of these basic, like all my kids had taken like all the core classes, but they very rarely don't know how to do stuff with their hands. And so to me, it's like, we're going to go hang pictures today. And it's like, oh God, Dad, I don't want to do that. I'm like, all right, here's what we got. We got to put tape up here. We're going to use a drill. Like, yeah, but I can use a 3M thing. All right, well, let me tell you why the 3M thing will work on here, but it won't work on there because of the surface finish of the. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, and so part of it is just educating them about common sense stuff. I think that's really our role as a parent is to help them fill in those gaps. So whether they complain about it or bitch about it, like it's not. My thing is that again, my job's not to be their friend. My job is there to prepare them, to how to make good decisions, find their passion, and respect others. And so, I have that responsibility that I have to pass on. And by the time they're 13 or 14, it's tough because they're very well formed by that point.
That's I actually was talking to a guy that was probably about your age, and he was said, you reap basically what you sow by about middle school, right?
Yeah.
And you might not realize it, but once the kids reach about middle school, that's when you see kind of the fruit of your efforts, and they could be good or they could be bad.
Yeah. So I had a guy I worked with at Ford, and he basically said, "Look, you're going to spend the time with your kids one way or another. You can spend it on the front end or you can spend it on the back end. But I'll tell you, spending it on the back end is 10 times more expensive and frustrating than spending it on the front end. So if you can spend the time up front because it'll get dividends. But if you don't spend the time, you'll end up, supporting them forever and doing it." And I'm just like, and that just stuck with me as like, yeah, I got to make sure, always carving time to make sure you can go do stuff. And there's no meeting that's important not to, having four, I think there was an advantage for us where we had this talk with them to say, look, there's four of you, there's two of us. We're not going to make every game. We're not going to make every practice. We're not going to be there all the time. And I think the moment you go from two, which is man on man, to zone, like the rules change a little bit. But now when I'm at practice, I'm there. Or when I'm at the game, it's like I'm at your game, not any of the other three. And so it forced us to be very, very mindful of when we're there, that it's special to them, and that we have to be there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an advantage of a bigger family in some cases.
So you said you were like about 35 when you said you had that shift from being self-aware. How old are your kids at that point, and then how did that affect your parenting?
Oh, they were so I have my first at 30. So let's see, they would have been 5. Let me just think about this. Yeah. 5, 3, 1, and a newborn.
Okay, yes, all right.
and it was like, I can't, to be honest, I can't do all this and try to figure out how to spell of. It's like, okay, something's going to have to give here. And there's a couple of books that people recommended to me that I listened to that were very, very helpful. One was basically Strength Finders, where it really declared what I was good at, and it basically helped me realize like I need to be doing this kind of stuff and not that kind of stuff. And so the second book was called The On Purpose Person, which is by Kevin McCarthy, who's a great guy. I've actually gotten to know him. And Kevin talks about basically that you need to really seek to find what unique thing you have inside you that's been inside you all along that drives you. And so I exist to make the abstract concrete. And so if I'm doing something to make the abstract concrete, that's I'm living on purpose. And so, for example, when I took that principle and did it in everything I did. So like in hockey, like I didn't play hockey, I didn't skate, I was a horrible skater, but I helped the kids, and I was like the dad coach who would herd the pucks and make sure they're in line. And in the moment that they learned the game and it started to become competitive, I wasn't making the abstract concrete anymore. It was like, okay, somebody else has got to do that. But I could help them take the abstraction of skating and hockey and offsides and learning the rules and kind of where to play and the basics of it. But once it got to getting much better at it, it was like, okay, we got to give that to somebody else. And so I knew when to be a coach and when not to be a coach by using that book and the principles behind it. It's very, very helpful to me I think saying no is as important as being able to say yes.
Yeah. So how do you, related to that, how do you, so one of the things is like, how do you not speak something over your child prior to that, like, not fulfill prophecy before, right? So I'm not saying that right, but saying like, okay, not declaring they're only good at these 3 things. And so that puts them in a box. My wife and I are kind of go at it with that. She's like, well, don't speak that over them. We need to help them discover what their strengths are. And we don't want to put them in a box too early, because I'll say, oh, my son's very engineering minded and he likes to build Legos and everything.
Yeah, and I actually think that it's much stronger than that. So as much as you can shape it, the fact is if they're not it, they're not it. Like
Yeah.
I think I have so my oldest is he went into school as an engineer and is just like, Dad, I want to do math. I want to work with data. And he's a math major now and he loves it. And he's like, but at some point it's like, and he felt like he was letting me down by saying he wasn't an engineer. I'm like, no, I want you to figure out what you want to do. And I just want to know why, why is engineering not what you want to do and what about it? And he had great answers for it. And so to me, it's more, I think we have to guide, but at the same time, we have to know when to not be so rigid that we're like, no, you need to be an engineer because you're good at these things. It's like, you got to trust them. So I'm not sure you can I'm sure you can, but I just I don't think we have that much power over them that they'll do something that they hate because we told them to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you.
So I do think sports is a really important thing, or some kind of team thing, because we work in a world where learning discipline, learning to know how to get better, learning rules, learning, kind of teamwork. There's a whole bunch of things that you learn so young, and it's almost like you can tell kids that didn't play sports from playing sports, at least in the world that I work in, and especially in engineering. You just find that they're used to having the answer, and the answer is the answer, and there's only one answer to everything, and you realize okay, there's 15 ways to score. There's not there's not one. And so part of it is, I think sports is just it's a great way in which to get your kids kind of oriented to and see things beyond you as a parent. So it forces that socialization that's more than just video games, if you will.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree 100% with that. I think I've seen a negative trend with that, though, in that being all about the sports, not necessarily about the outcomes. Like my 6-year-old, we signed him up for t-ball, and we just went to the city league here in Grand Rapids. It's like sign up, it's like $35, and it's like, well, he could get on the exclusive premier 6-year-old team for like $700, and I was like, well, why does that matter? Well, then it sets him up for success, and he can. I'm like, well, really, what is this about? Why are we even doing this? We're not doing this because we think he's going to be a professional baseball player. We're doing this so he can get social interaction with other kids. He can learn how to, be a part of a team, and I think that was a conversation my wife and I had. But you see that I think it goes back to the buddy thing, because then it becomes about like what. It's right. A social club for the parents. It's a status thing. It's like, hey, my son plays on this Premier League or whatever. And
and I will say I fell into that trap. I have one kid who played all of them played hockey, but one played football and played football in college, and another one who played in hockey and played AAA hockey, and then was in the Olympic development program, and then basically went to college to play hockey, and then realized I don't want to do this anymore. And it's like all of those things where again, I think they end up learning what they like and why they like it. And at some point in time, when I think my daughter basically said, look, I want to go to school and play hockey. I don't want to play hockey and go to school. I'm like, okay. And so part of it, though, is she was very driven. She loved the teamwork part of it. She loved the camaraderie part of it. There was, it was very, very social in that aspect. It was hard. She loved to work hard, but at the same time, when it got down to I get a scholarship for this and I want to do these things, but it's like, I don't want that pressure. I'm like, okay. So she actually plays on the boys team at Xavier, and she's the only girl in the league.
That's awesome.
So she was at the University of Michigan, and she was playing in the girls there, and she dropped out. And she went down to Xavier, and basically she's a math major as well, and she's playing hockey with the boys. It's a little scary because it's full check, but I'm all right with it. So, right. I'm not really all right with it, but
how does your wife feel about it?
My wife's actually more comfortable than I am, because Mary's 6'1", and she's a defenseman, and she's bigger than most people on the ice. And when she throws a check, she's hitting hard. So it's but it's just one of those things. It's my daughter. So.
Yeah. I can partly understand. I mean, my daughters are really young, but
yeah. Well, my whole thing was, I was afraid as a parent. I was afraid, how am I going to handle dating? Oh my gosh, I have no idea. I had no concept of any of that. And then as she was playing hockey, and she was 12 or 13, and she got in a fight, and she's playing with the boys, and she beat the crap out of this boy. And it was just you know what? You can date anybody you want. I'm all right with this now.
That is great.
Yeah. So.
Oh man.
Anyway,
hey, thanks so much.
I think the thing is balance. It's realizing that I've done 6 startups My thing is the businesses will come and go. There will be people who judge you on all different ways of whether you're a good parent or a bad parent, or you're there too much or you're not there enough. And my thing is you just need to come to terms with what you are, how you want to raise your children, because at the end, you're born with your family and you die with your family, and that you have to be prepared for kind of that reflection of that time period, that you did the best you could as a parent to do what's right for your family, because that's what's most important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Yep. No problem. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for listening to the show. You can find out more about us and sign up to receive updates at 2centdad.com. If you liked what you heard or just want to say hi, you can shoot me an email at mike@2centdad.com. Please leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. It helps us to get the word out to the most people possible. And the show is made possible through the support of EC Group International, building software teams since 1999.